Back now. Just to give you a heads up, we have actually pulled in our 3 SAS datasets, adult, lab, and youth. The first thing we're going to do is we have our main SAS code, and this is the code. This is your bread and butter. This is actually the main code you're going to use for your analysis. If there's anything you do not want to lose, it is this main code, right? Because when you run this will compile and give you all your results. It will actually track, it will actually bookkeep your entire progress. Any notes on how you manipulated your data, you will use via this syntax. First thing we're going to do is we have our data sitting in NHANES dataset, right? And we have to reference this data. And remember, in order to use this dataset, it has to show up somewhere in the library. So we're going to quickly just create our lib name, library name. And then what are we going to call this library name? Why don't we just call it NHANES3? Where's the location of that? We come over here. It's in this folder. So if I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to properties. I'm going to copy this. And I'm just going to do a little semicolon and run this. And now it says NHANES3 library reference was successfully assigned, and this is the physical location. So if we come over here now, notice that if we go to NHANES3, that's the library. Now, if we want to reference this data set, let's start with an example. Let's use adult 1. Let's say we want to reference adult 1. Well, in order to reference it and do manipulation on adult 1, right, we're going to actually say, hey, what is the data set we are using? So that's your set statement. And it's always, what's the library that we're referring to? That's NHANES3. And inside NHANES3, let's reference adult 1. And you're probably asking me, is SAS case sensitive? And the answer is no. But we should start getting into a habit of being case sensitive, because if you decide to use other software, such as Python, the syntax is very case sensitive. So it's very good that we start this habit. And then what's the data set we are creating? Right, and I'm going to create a new data set in the work library right over here. That's your temp library. And what I mean by temp is as soon as you close this SAS session, right, when you are done saving your code and you close the SAS session, all the work files disappear. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if I'm doing a lot of aside analyses, right, to get my final data set, I don't want all those data sets to actually save on my hard drive. I don't want all of those mid data sets, in other words, the data sets in between what I want at the end, to actually save. I just want the final product, right? So I'm going to call this work, and I'm just going to call this adult 2. Right? And if I run this, right, this means that reference over here and any results show up in this new data set called adult 2, which is sitting in the work library. The whole thing in SAS is we never want to write over what we are working on. We always want to produce another data set and work in sequence. And that other data set called work.adult2 will actually reflect our results in adult 1. So for example, let's do an example over here. Let's say I have sequence and I have another variable called DMA racer right over here, number 123 right over here. That's called race, right? Let's say I just want to have a new data set that keeps sequence and this data set here. called, so we're going to keep sequence. Actually, let me. And we're going to keep this other variable name called DMA racer. And I'm not going to tell you what that means just yet. We'll talk about that. DMA racer, right? So in other words, NHANES3 library .adult1 will not change the results, right? The results will be reflected in adult2. So if I run this, notice this is a nice blue screen, right? And notice your new data set, adult2, has 2 variables, right? Before that, we had many, many variables. So if I come over here and I go to work, and I go to adult2, there should only be 2 variables here because I only wanted to keep 2. And if I close this and go back to adult1, which is in my NHANES3 file, this adult1 has not been touched, right? The results are not reflected in this. And this is because we always want to keep the original. We don't want to start marking up the original data set, right? So we mark up in sequence. It's very good bookkeeping habits. Okay, the first thing we're going to do now that we got that set up is actually, we'll do it in the next video. I'm going to actually manipulate some parts of NHANES3.adult1 and the results will show up in adult2. Just to let you know, if I don't put a library here, right? So I'm going to go into work. I'm going to remove this. Let's say I delete this. Right click. Right, and I delete this. Let's say it's no longer here. Right, nothing's here. If I just write adult2 without a library, SAS will assume that it's going to be the new file, the new data set is going to be in the work folder by default. So if I run this, notice if I go to work, you have adult2 again. So in the next video, I'm going to do a lot of manipulation in adult1 and the results will show up in adult2. So I will see you in the next video.